What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. The gaming journalist Jason Schreier has been releasing massive bits of information from his upcoming book, Play Nice, The Rise and Fall of Blizzard Entertainment, Overwatch being a centerpiece in that transition period, where the old Blizzard values that built the company were fully destroyed over time. I've collected some of the most interesting pieces for either Overwatch fans or Blizzard fans, in a combination of Jason Schreier's AMA on Reddit, as well as follow-up posts he's done with excerpts from the book. Jason's asked about the string of high-profile departures for Team 4 before Overwatch 2 shipped, including the game director Jeff Kaplan and the producer Sonny Chaco. Jason says this is covered extensively in his upcoming book, but here's the short version. Overwatch 1 was a huge success, and Bobby Kotick was thrilled about it. So thrilled, in fact, he asked the board of directors to give Mike Morhaime a standing ovation during one meeting. But following Overwatch 1's release, Team 4, which is the team for Overwatch, began to run into a bit of a problem. They had too much work to do. They had to simultaneously, one, keep making new stuff for Overwatch 1, which of course they didn't, which almost accidentally turned into a live service game, and two, work on Overwatch 2, which was Jeff Kaplan's baby and would have brought more players into the universe via PvE, and three, help out with the ever-growing Overwatch League. Kotick's solution to the problem was to suggest that Team 4 hire more people, hundreds more people, like his Call of Duty factory, and start a second team to work on Overwatch 2 while the old team runs Overwatch 1, or vice versa. Kaplan and Chaco Sonny were resistant to this because they believed pretty strongly in the culture they'd built. More people can sometimes lead to more problems and less efficient development, and led to all sorts of problems as years went on. This post is riddled with interesting information. First of all, stating that Overwatch 1 was accidentally a live service game. During the time that Overwatch 1 blew up, lots of other actual live service free-to-play games came out. And from covering Overwatch 1 since release, we were always incredibly critical of how little they seemed to want to produce for the live service game, as they called it. They did call it that, they just didn't actually service it like it was. That's because Team 4 at the time was much more modeled after the rest of Blizzard Entertainment, which was more focusing on producing big IPs, maximizing creativity and polish, which was distinctly at odds with the, quote, factories that Activision ran on the other side of the company. Blizzard really was able to leverage their goodwill of this at the time, which allowed them to underproduce content in comparison to their competitors, like not give us features that the game badly needed. It famously took multiple years for Roll Queue to come out, for example, which most players, I think, just assume is the natural way you have to play Overwatch. Well, half of the first game's life didn't even have it. They got away with that because everyone loved the company so much. And there was a constant sense that the community expected the devs to turn around something awesome right around the corner, which might sound surprising if you're a newer Blizzard fan, because the sentiment nowadays is the exact opposite. This made for a very uncomfortable schism covering Overwatch 1 as a content creator, because they would talk like it was a live service game, but not service it like it was. Meanwhile, of course, as we all know now, many years later, as they have long since publicly admitted and apologized for, they transitioned their efforts towards Overwatch 2 while also having to work on the Overwatch League. Now, to the exact point of Kotick wanting to hire more developers and Jeff Kaplan resisting it, kind of mirrors the larger battle that was between Bobby Kotick and Mike Morhaime. Jeff, of course, was a rather early World of Warcraft developer, sharing similar philosophies to Mike Morhaime, and the battle between those two gets extended on in Jason's book, as well as an article that we'll look at later that's an excerpt from it. This shouldn't come as too big of a surprise, because under the autonomy era of Blizzard, Overwatch only spawned out of Project Titan, failing for 7 years. So Jeff, of course, wanted the leeway to be able to do that again, and there is some merit to be said that a leaner, smaller, more focused team can adhere to creative unity and perhaps be more efficient, but ultimately at the end of the day, we can clearly see that this is a rare Bobby Kotick W, because we were asking one team to do 3.5 jobs or so, and it can hardly be said that any of them were successful. Like, did they service Overwatch 1 well enough? No. Did they make Overwatch 2 well enough? No. It's largely canceled, right? And the Overwatch League, of course, famously died. As Jason says in his AMA, none of this is cut and dry, of course. It isn't one strategy good, another strategy bad, but without a doubt, multiple strategies competing for power doesn't work. Alchemist on the AMA chimes in, who I know was a long-standing esports production guy, was around and hired at those early stages of Overwatch League, and he says, Owl took up so much dev time, I would get texts from the devs during games about camera switches. I kept thinking, don't you have your own job to do? And I could only speculate on which of the devs would feel so invested and egotistical that they could do other people's jobs while not doing theirs very well, but I won't do that here. It's just safe to say that Blizzard championing developers of their games as rock stars had lots of knock-on effects other than the most scandalous of headlines. With great power comes great responsibility. You know how it seemed obvious that Blizzard should have its own Netflix series for one of, if not all of their IP? Jason says the book reveals that they had series in development with Netflix for StarCraft, Overwatch, and Diablo. But because Netflix got sued for poaching high-level employees during their contract term, that all went away. Specifically, in this case, taking CFO Spencer Newman, who hadn't completed his 3-year contract yet. Because some random suit wanted to get paid more by Netflix, we lost a Netflix show for all of our favorite IPs. Meanwhile, Riot fans and Castlevania fans and every other fan of every other game out there has mediocre to great TV shows. We get nothing. Are you kidding me? Jason's asked about the Overwatch 2 PvE and why it hasn't been fully canceled. Jason says it's fully cut as far as I know. No idea why the company hasn't officially said anything. Maybe they don't feel like they need to. With this kind of thing, companies tend to not fully commit to an answer, just in case down the line they might change their mind, but the writing's been on the wall for that for quite a long time, I feel. Especially after the PvE missions were so lackluster, poorly reviewed by anyone who's ever played a video game before, other than maybe our most die-hard boot-looking streamers that will say everything Team 4 does is perfect. After the Microsoft acquisition, loads of employees got canned. As well, all public communication angles towards the PvP being the actual focus of Overwatch 2 going forward. I am going to go through a lot of the very interesting Blizzard general information, but we have a few more points that speaks directly to the Overwatch fans' experience. The key takeaway solidifying the death of old Blizzard was the hire of Zurza as chief financial officer, a guy that Bobby Kotick forced to the forefront. Schreier says this, he said he wanted to build a world-class finance department and begin bringing in new employees with Ivy League MBAs and backgrounds at firms like McKinsey & Co. Suddenly, finance people who'd otherwise been relegated to the background were fixtures in strategy meetings, asking why Hearthstone, a Magic the Gathering-esque mobile game, wasn't pushing players to buy card packs more often, and why Overwatch, an online shooter game, wasn't selling maps and heroes to generate extra revenue. Of course, the lunacy of this is that it's directly at odds with Jeff Kaplan's vision of the game, which was more closely aligned to the way Mike Morhaime liked to run Blizzard, focusing on player goodwill and longevity as opposed to maximizing profits in the short term. Overwatch 1 launched as a box product with supplemental income from the loot box system for added cosmetics, but unlike other competitors, even within their own company, Call of Duty, they didn't sell new content. All new maps and heroes would be added in that original box price. Now, of course, they wanted to drag their feet on properly servicing the live game, slow with balance, and eventually cutting off the tap of new content. I think what's interesting about all of this is that somehow we got the worst of both management strategies. Bobby Kotick's methods tend to produce hollow products at a fast rate. You get a lot of content, but often doesn't have the polish and charm. The Blizzard model, that is happy to release things soon TM when it's actually finished, takes longer, takes risks, but has the potential to have the higher upside to create a connection to the player that lasts a lifetime. After covering this game for so many years, I think you guys can see how I lost my hair, because at every single turn, it seems like Overwatch fans caught an L due to a confluence of factors out of our control. And because these man-children couldn't figure out how to manage the game towards one direction or another, we got split into several, only recently getting some bittersweet focus under the Microsoft acquisition and regaining part of that old identity, with now Heroes being free for everyone. Overwatch and Project Titan before it was at a centerpiece of this entire battle going on, and if you're a Blizzard fan like me, you find the rest of this information we'll go over incredibly interesting, especially understanding how Overwatch even came to exist at all. Bred from Project Titan, the MMO successor they had worked on for 7 years, something that Bobby Kotick was so excited about, it was the reason why he wanted to buy the company to begin with, and had the devs of Project Titan meet celebrities like Tom Brady. Then, of course, leading into the crawl, walk, run approach to developing Overwatch, where Overwatch 1 was intended to be the PvP game that it was. They wanted Overwatch 2 to expand into having more endlessly replayable gameplay similar to Diablo, with a big upgrade to the PvP. Then they wanted Overwatch 3 to just be an MMO again, going full circle to eventually make Titan like they always wanted. Jason describes it as this, and he says Titan was a secret project at Blizzard meant to be the big successor to World of Warcraft. It was in development for 6 to 7 years, cost $80 million, and was canceled in 2013. That helped open the door for Activision to start stepping in and asking questions, and the pressure just ramped up year after year. Activision also pushed Blizzard to hire a CFO who came in and made all sorts of changes, and that's Zurza, the guy we spoke about earlier. In some of these posts, I think there's some interesting clarifications that those of us that are really passionate about this entire story and timeline should pay close attention to. In this post, Jason clarifies that not every ill doing can be put at the feet of Activision. It's not that simple. In 2010, World of Warcraft released the first store mount, the Celestial Steed, 2 years after the merger by Activision, and that decision was put at the feet of Bobby Kotick, but Jason seems to think that Blizzard was behind it. He says here, 2009 to 2010 was an interesting time for Blizzard. World of Warcraft was firing on all cylinders and growing every year, but their other projects weren't quite as successful. StarCraft 2 had to slip a year because of the new Battle.net not being ready, while Diablo 3 had gone through multiple reboots and Blizzard North's collapse and was still years away. People were still jazzed about Titan, but we all know how that went. Server costs were high, and the company was growing more and more every year. So Mike Morhaime started pushing all sorts of teams to include some sort of in-game monetization. World of Warcraft had cosmetics, StarCraft 2 would have custom map marketplace, and Diablo 3 would have the auction house. Fun fact, one of the reasons Diablo 3 never got a second expansion was because after removing the auction house, it no longer had a source of recurring revenue, and so Blizzard decided to move straight to Diablo 4 rather than trying to make new content for it. The merger undoubtedly came with new pressures, because now, rather than just being a small part of Vivendi, Blizzard was one of the two names in the title of a publicly traded company, and I'm sure that had an impact on Morheime's decision-making, but this push for in-game revenue did not, as far as I know, come from Activision or Kotick. The pressures from Activision really started in 2013 after Titan was canceled and trickled all the way down to the entirety of the company around 2017, 2018. What I learned from this is that both companies or both sides of the company were probably fine with microtransactions. The big difference is whether either side believed in more of a mass production point of view with big teams and brute force, whereas Morhaime clearly was interested in creative risk-taking. For Bloomberg, Jason Schreier publishes an excerpt from the book, which really gives an insight between the two management philosophies between Bobby Kotick and Mike Morhaime, who couldn't be more different, with the key pressure points coming around 2017. Some of the key takeaways I got from the article was seeing how appointing business-minded corporate goons who don't understand gaming at all, or the relationship that the consumers, aka gamers, a term I don't even think these guys understand, is so much different than the relationship that a customer has with a bar of soap. That's the only way you can describe some of these completely tone-deaf takes that they actually think will increase revenue, which weren't the principles that built the company to begin with. So here's when Zurza was introduced. The company was doing well. Its revenue was $2.4 billion in 2016, thanks to the continued success of World of Warcraft and the runaway hit Overwatch. Still, Zurza seemed perplexed why Blizzard was maintaining expensive projects with low profit margins, such as the annual BlizzCon event. Blizzard managers explained that having their own convention engendered loyalty from customers and employees. Zurza suggested they kill it. Before Zurza, the company was run by Blizzard lifers and video game enthusiasts, but the CFO brought a completely different mindset. He frequently drew comparisons to his 2 decades developing brands such as Crest, Huggies, and Ivory, for example, asking why Blizzard couldn't just speed up development of a game by opening a new office, as he'd done to ship soap more quickly in Brazil. Blizzard employees recall scoffing behind his back at his seemingly inability to understand the video game industry, pointing out that no one would fly thousands of miles to attend a shampoo convention or meet their best friend through a shared love of their favorite toothpaste. In the coming years, as Zurza gained more power, staff began to see him as an avatar for Kotick, there to serve the CEO's will, a reasonable, if not totally accurate characterization. Occasionally, Zurza would disagree with Kotick and push back against budget cuts, according to people who were in meetings with them both. Kotick wasn't going to force Blizzard to release games before they were ready, but his message was consistent. Blizzard was letting its players down by not delivering game content more often. To Morhaime and his inner circle, these demands were contradictory. Kotick celebrated when Blizzard produced a new hit, but failed to grasp what it took to create one. He says here, by 2017, Kotick and Tipple were battling with Morhaime every day. They asked why Blizzard had so many people in non-development departments, particularly customer service and cinematics, a group that made short films based on the games. The answer, players appreciated those things. During planning meetings, Activision executives would point out that they had more than 1,000 people on Call of Duty, while World of Warcraft only had a few hundred. Tipple offered man-month calculations to demonstrate that the only way to release new content more quickly, a goal both companies shared, would be to add hundreds more people to the World of Warcraft team. Morhaime believed in giving his teams agency to make their own hiring decisions. Tipple snarked that Blizzard should change its company value to every voice within Blizzard matters. In the spring of 2017, Tipple stepped down as Activision Blizzard's COO. Somehow things got worse after that. Morhaime and his circle discovered that Tipple had sometimes served as counterweight to Kotick and had been willing to check some of the CEO's worst impulses. So you hear that? This Tipple guy was reining in Bobby Kotick. But then 2017, it all changed when the Fire Nation attacked. His successor, Cody Johnson, went from being Kotick's cordial and seemingly reasonable chief of staff to another potential roadblock. In April of 2018, Johnson organized an offsite event for leaders of all 3 divisions, Activision Publishing, Blizzard, and King. The theme was unification, one ABK, as Johnson called it in a meeting. Kotick and Johnson were putting a corporate slogan behind a dynamic that had been apparent to Morhaime for years. Blizzard was losing its independence. Blizzard had already been seeing departures of important staff, including the heads of Hearthstone, and many of the remaining executive producers and directors were expressing frustration with what they saw as Activision's growing interference. This article continues, guys, and of course it goes on at great length in his book, but I think this sets a really interesting template to the interpolitics of the Game of Thrones between Activision Blizzard King. Trying to unify as one ABK means Blizzard, you don't get to make your own rules anymore. We're all going to do the same thing. Which is to say, Mike Morhaime's belief system was going to die. One of the most significant fights between Activision and Blizzard was over how to reward staff. Kotick believed in giving the biggest bonuses to the teams that delivered the largest profits, which would encourage more people to move to World of Warcraft, while Morhaime thought the entire company should benefit from profit sharing, otherwise there'd be no incentive for people to experiment with new ideas. They struck a few compromises over time, as Morhaime agreed to shift a greater portion of profit sharing to the World of Warcraft team without eliminating bonuses for the other divisions, but the argument was always simmering. Kotick valued consistency, and Blizzard's belief in experimentation was at odds with that. Blizzard profit sharing swung like a pendulum. Kotick had always harbored a not-so-secret desire to expand his empire beyond game publishing. He established an Activision Blizzard film and television studio in 2015, promising a Call of Duty cinematic universe, and hiring Stacey Sher, the producer of Pulp Fiction, and Aaron Brockovich to help run it. Later, during a presentation to investors, he outlined plans for Activision to become more like Walt Disney Company. He spent $5.9 billion to acquire King, the maker of Candy Crush, and planned to go big on in-game advertising. He brought in former ESPN CEO Steve Borstein to create an esports division and announced that Activision bought the assets of Major League Gaming Corp., then a leading U.S. esports company, for $46 million to create the ESPN of esports. The sudden enthusiasm for competitive gaming was a surprise to Morhaime. In the past, Kotick had protested Blizzard's investments in esports, but Blizzard's leadership chose to see the change of heart as an opportunity. A small team of Blizzard employees met with Kotick to formally pitch what they were calling the Overwatch League, an esports circuit modeled on traditional sports leagues. Kotick loved the idea and put money and Activision's marketing muscle behind it, envisioning it as the esports equivalent of the National Football League to accompany his ESPN. Nate Nanzer, who had become commissioner of the Overwatch League, had suggested charging potential owners $250,000 to establish a team. Kotick said they should aim bigger, $20 million per franchise. Everyone was shocked. 20 million? Most of the world didn't even know what Overwatch was. But Kotick wanted to recruit billionaires who already owned sports teams and didn't want to underprice the opportunity. Over the next year, Activision Blizzard hired executives from the NFL and NBA to staff its esports division, largely overlooking the expertise within Blizzard's existing esports group. In 2017, Activision absorbed Blizzard's consumer product division, responsible for selling gear and striking deals with outside companies such as Lego AS. Kotick wanted to make hats, sweatshirts, and mugs based on the Overwatch League. We were hiring people left and right, says Matt Beecher, who was Blizzard's vice president of consumer products. It was just wild. Having run a successful company for 2 decades, Morhaime had more business sense than Activision people gave him credit for. He was just as competitive as his colleagues at Activision. One of his hobbies was playing poker at a professional level, and he'd spent years trying to find ways to satisfy Kotick without giving up what he thought made Blizzard great. He was a profit-motivated guy like everybody else, says Hunt, the former executive who was Morheime's chief of staff for about 2 years. The difference is he wasn't a profit-motivated first guy. I think this kind of quote really makes sense when you think about trying to just put it in black and white terms. When microtransactions were added to World of Warcraft in 2010, Morhaime was behind that, but he also would have been behind using that money in order to take creative risks to make great products, as opposed to only do that. From my point of view, guys, I've been a fan of so many of these games through my life. And one of the quickest ways I think that we could win the argument one day against these corporate level executives is by allowing them to imagine all of the lost revenue when they destroy consumer goodwill by mishandling and decimating an IP such as Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero, and more that Activision did. While they can hang their hat high on some of that working sometimes, it's really hard to quantify the destruction of the thing they have to cancel. There's this businessman that I love to watch his talks whenever he gives them at TED or goes on interviews on podcasts. His name is Simon Sinek, and the way he describes competing in business is trying to establish the infinite game, as opposed to the winner-take-all game that many greedy capitalists try to set up. Like, if they're not making all the money, it's a failure. Whereas there's more ways to win in business and in life. Sustainability for the long term is hard to track because it's setting up a reliable success that you can bank later on. You can't see it on the profit margin sheet from year to year because it's goodwill that you can cash in when you eventually slip up, make a mistake, have a bad year, whatever, down the line. Over the course of my gaming life, I've been privy to watch Blizzard's reputation entirely flip, a thing that I never could have thought would happen. Growing up, grinding Diablo 2 and StarCraft as a teenager, to transition to cover Overwatch full-time in 2016, and witness its downfall with the rest of you. What a wild ride it has been. There was a series of posts in the AMA that I also thought were interesting, but are here at the end as miscellaneously categorized. Jason's asked, what do you hope people walk away from when reading your book? He says, I want people to come away thinking that nothing is simple. The creation of Blizzard's brilliant franchises wasn't simple. The battle between Blizzard and Activision wasn't simple. The climate of sexual discrimination wasn't simple. There's always nuance and complexity beyond the splashy headlines. And a lot of the times, what might seem like greed or malice is actually people trying to do what they think is right, but making mistakes along the way, or not knowing how to fix the ingrained problems that don't have easy solutions. I hope people come away from the book with a better understanding of how complex Blizzard was and how many different things it meant to to different people. He's asked if Microsoft was to blame for BlizzCon being canceled this year. He doesn't think so because they just don't have things to announce. Of course, now with new management of Microsoft, we are still writing that history. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What terms we could use to describe Microsoft's acquisition with Overwatch and Blizzard overall. I think a lot leaner and focused, whereas in hindsight, the schism between Jeff Kaplan or Mike Morhaime and Bobby Kotick was a complex mix of different pipe dreams working concurrently. Other fun tidbits from the book: there was a God of War styled game that featured Thrall from World of Warcraft. That game was called Andromeda, but canceled when Alex Afrasabi was fired in 2020. Another game was Avalon, a game that would have been Minecraft in the Warcraft universe. There's a lot of canceled games that we don't really know much about. There's a chapter on Heroes of the Storm and how Blizzard allowed Riot and Valve to beat them at their own game. For those of you that don't know, the entire MOBA genre was built under Blizzard's feet within the use map settings custom game creator in Warcraft 3, but because World of Warcraft was so successful, they were very slow to try to make use of that as an IP, instead focusing more on the RTS games that had the fundamentals they liked. They were very slow to respond to the MOBA genre in general, and too slow in fact, because they had to put that game in maintenance mode. Okay guys, I think that's everything I want to cover. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like and let me know in the comment section down below what you think about all of this behind the scenes information finally coming to light years later. To make sure you don't miss out on our upcoming videos, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come live. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.